All right, let's talk about the Epstein Files. For years, just hearing that name has conjured up all sorts of scandalous possibilities, right? Well, millions of pages have finally been released, and we're going to dig in and see what they actually tell us. This whole thing has been shrouded in so much mystery and, let's be honest, a ton of political maneuvering. So the big questions are, how did we even get to this point, and what's really inside these documents? We're going to break down the entire timeline and see what was actually revealed.
So where does this whole saga really begin? Well, interestingly, it's not with the files themselves. It all kicks off with a simple campaign promise that ended up causing a massive political storm.
So picture this. It's the 2024 presidential campaign. Donald Trump, at the time just a candidate, gets asked if he'd release the Epstein files. His answer? Yeah, I would. Super clear, super simple. And you can bet that promise got a lot of his supporters fired up.
Okay, but here's where things get really interesting. Watch how fast the whole story changes in 2025. We start in February, and the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is on Fox News saying the client list is literally on her desk ready for review. Fast forward to July, the whole thing flips on its head. The DOJ completely reverses course, and suddenly, President Trump is calling the whole thing a big hoax. I mean, talk about a whiplash moment. And yeah, it created an absolute political firestorm.
So, you can probably guess what happened next. That complete 180 from the administration? It lit a fire under Congress. And what we saw was something pretty rare in Washington, a truly powerful bipartisan revolt to force their hand. The charge was led by Republican Congressman Thomas Massie, and they used this kind of obscure procedural trick called a discharge petition. Now, what that is, essentially, is a way for rank-and-file members to go around the party leadership and force a vote on a bill. It's a real power move, and believe me, it is not easy to pull off.
But they did it. And once that ball got rolling, there was just no stopping it. The House passed the act with this jaw-dropping vote of 427 to 1. Just one person voted no. The Senate saw which way the wind was blowing and passed it unanimously the very next day. It was crystal clear. The public pressure had worked, and Washington had to act.
So, the bill gets signed into law. The clock starts ticking. The Justice Department has 30 days to release everything. Sounds straightforward, right? Well, the actual rollout was, let's just say, a complete mess. So, first off, they missed the legal deadline. Not a great start. And then when the first batch of files finally drops, people open them up and see, well, they see this. Just page after page, hundreds of them, completely blacked out. So instead of getting the transparency everyone was demanding, it just made people even more suspicious about what was being hidden.
And this right here, this really gets to the core of the whole controversy. Check this out. The DOJ's own team identified over 6 million pages that were potentially responsive. 6 million. But what did they actually release to the public? Just under 3.5 million. That's a huge gap, and that's where the story starts getting even more complicated.
On top of all that, the DOJ put out some pretty big disclaimers. It was basically them saying, hey, just so you know, this is a massive data dump of everything we have. That includes unverified tips, rumors, and maybe even stuff that's just flat out fake. They even made a special point to flag what they called untrue and sensationalist claims made against President Trump, which they said were submitted just before the 2020 election.
Okay, so with all those warnings and caveats out of the way, what do we actually find in those nearly 3.5 million pages of emails, photos, and government reports? Let's get into it.
Well, for one, the files show a huge, powerful network that was still buzzing long after Epstein's first conviction. You've got emails showing the family of Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick visiting the island in 2012. That's years after he said he'd cut ties. You see emails back and forth with Richard Branson, photos involving Prince Andrew. The documents really paint this vivid picture of Epstein still having access to the absolute top tier of the global elite.
I mean, take a look at this email from Elon Musk back in 2012. He's literally asking Epstein, what day/night will be the wildest party on your island? This was apparently while he was talking about visiting with his wife at the time. And it wasn't a one-off. Other emails show them trying to line up holiday plans together.
Now, it's really important to add the context here. Musk has been very clear, stating on X that he never actually went to the island and that he turned down a bunch of invitations. He says this correspondence can be misinterpreted. And this is a perfect example of the kind of situation we see throughout these files. A document says one thing and the person involved says another.
And it wasn't just emails with famous people.
The files are also packed with some really bizarre stuff. You've got these strange emails that Epstein apparently sent to himself, making these wild claims about Bill Gates. Then there's an FBI document where a source alleges Epstein was a Mossad agent. Now, whether any of that is true or not, it all points to the same thing. Epstein was still deeply, deeply connected in elite circles, long after everybody knew who he was.
And as you can imagine, when these details started coming out, the fallout was immediate. For many of the people named, they were very real, very significant consequences.
And the impact wasn't just in one place. It was swift and it was global. Over in the UK, Lord Peter Mandelson resigns from the Labour Party after his name pops up in financial records and emails. In Slovakia, the National Security Advisor is out. And back in the US, you see these prestigious organizations like the US-Ireland Alliance and Queen's University Belfast scrambling to remove former Senator George J. Mitchell's name from their programs. People were running for cover.
So, we've talked about all these names and all the careers that have been impacted, but the biggest story here might actually be about what we haven't seen.
Remember how Congress demanded the release of all the files? Well, the DOJ is still holding back over 2.5 million pages. Let that sink in. 2.5 million documents that they themselves said were potentially responsive are still being kept under wraps.
Now, the official reason from the DOJ is that they need to protect victims and privileged information, and that makes sense. But for a lot of people, releasing only part of the story just creates more questions than answers. It leaves you wondering, with millions of pages still kept secret, what part of this whole story are we still not being told?